Hello, in this recording we're going to test the new Publish to MDF feature of the compensation module. And to do so, we're going to use this specific template that I've prepared for this demo, where we have I only kept the fields that will be published back to the MDF object. Some are editable on screen and some are read-only, either hard-coded in the formula or coming from a lookup table. And this worksheet here is we're looking at the composition module and the data from the executive review. There is a worksheet and it's already completed, but to save time in the demo and the several demos we will do of publishing back, I will use the executive review instead of having to go to the worksheet. It's a feature that allows me to edit completed worksheets from the executive review and simply save so that I can quickly run the publish back again. So let's take a look at the data. We have a date that we need to enter. It's an editable column on screen for each employee here on the worksheet. So we can choose for Marcia October 6th and for Kelly October 28th. And then we have all these fields are going to be published back to the MDF object. So we can on top of the dates, we can add specific number that we choose, for example, 930 or 4.35 or 45. And then amounts, we can do 10 and 15. And then text, finally, maybe hello 4, hello 5, and hello 6. And then all we have to do here is save, and it will update the worksheet that is already completed and will allow us to do the publish back quickly. But before we run the publish back to the MDF object, we're going to check that there is no data in no existing data in the MDF object. So to do so, we have to go to manage data as a system admin. So in my demo, Carla Grant is the system admin, and go to search for the name of my MDF, which we'll come back to the structure of it and how to create it at the end of this recording after the demo. Here I found my MDF, and so if I click here, if there were records published for users, they would show here, which we will see after the publish back. So we're good. We can go as Carla and go to compensation home and find our template and run the publish to MDF. And once the publish is successful, we will see it on the manage data screen with all the data we entered in the executive review. So here, this is my template, MDF publish back testing. And to publish to MDF, we have to go to complete compensation cycle and select publish selected employees in the metadata framework. If it's a first publish, you can go ahead. If it's a second publish and the data has changed, you would need to click on allow override for the same record to be overridden with the data that you changed. In our case, we can just do publish compensation data for all employees. You can use the check form status button to know quickly how many forms are completed, because forms must be completed for employees to be published. And click on submit, and then track the job under monitor jobs. So this is our job here. It just showed up and it's job status in progress. So we want to refresh until it shows it's completed. And here, here we want to download always the status, which should be here, that will give us the details of the job. So it says 2 successful, which means we should be seeing the data in manage data if we go back. And from there, we will take a look at the structure of the MDF object. So here again, I select MDF publish back testing. And I only had one published. I can only see one here. But I think it's because of the effective date that I chose here actually. So if I do as of 10/31, I should have both. Yeah, so that's a great example. So for Kelly, we entered a publish date. So this MDF is effective dated. So we entered a publish back effective date for Kelly of October 28th. which is the reason why if your search as of is before the record date, then the person will not show in this list. So we do have both records here. And now let's check the dates. We have the October 6th that we entered for Marcia with the LO5, the amount editable 9.3 and 10. So everything got correctly published here. Let's check for Kelly now. For Kelly as well, 4.45, 15, hello 6, and she didn't have any information in the money and amount columns read only. So now that we've successfully done the first publish, let's take a look at the structure of the MDF and which fields are how to configure the MDF that you will use for publish back. So I guess the first best way to start is to talk about the fields that you created in your MDF object to receive the information from the compensation worksheet. So what is really important is that these fields must be in the same format than the columns on the compensation worksheet. So if you're publishing a date from a column of type date on the compensation worksheet, the field of your MDF when you build it should be a date as well. Same for text, it should be a text field on the MDF if it's a text in the compensation worksheet. And for both money and amount, the format when you're adding a field to the MDF object should be decimal. And we'll see that in a second when we go to configure object definition. A field that is mandatory is the template ID. So it has to be in the definition of the MDF object, and it gets populated by default with the ID from the template you use to launch the worksheets. So that cannot be, it has to be there for the publish to work. And finally, at the bottom here, we have a field which is not at all mandatory, but it's an example that I made of how you can make calculations when you're publishing back to MDF in additional fields. So you can publish back only these fields from your compensation template, but you can define custom fields at the MDF level that will have formulas in them with math expressions that will take some of the values from here and use them in formulas to come up with a specific output, which is great for example, long-term incentives or stock options that vest over several years and need to have specific calculations. So we'll once we go to configure object definition to look at the structure of the MDF, we'll take a look at how to build a field that will have a math expression in it and will be auto-populated based on the data that's sent back from the comp worksheet. So let's actually do that and go to the place where you would create the MDF object, which is under configure object definition. So that's where, when you want to build a new publish to MDF, that's where you should always start. The first step is always to build the MDF first, and then reference it in the XML of your compensation template. So let's take a look at my MDF object. It is called MDF Publish Back Testing. And we'll just go from top to bottom and look at what is really important. So we have the code here. So the code, it's the CUST letters and the underscore will get added to the name, the code that you give to your MDF. It's important that you don't add any special characters. It's better to keep it in one block and not add any exclamation mark or hyphens or underscore to the code. You can have a proper label here with spaces and nicely written, but the code should be in one block to prevent any failed or issues with the publish. Another thing that is important is to understand what happens if you have an effective dated MDF versus a non-effective dated. It's very simple. If you have an effective dated MDF, the data from the compensation worksheet will be published to the MDF as of the date that you define, just like we did it. On screen, we entered October 6th and October 28th. If you choose a non-effective dated, then it will override the value, the top of stack value. So it's every time you run a publish to MDF, it will override the data that's already there. So effective dating is keeping the MDF effective dated is the leading practice because it helps you manage the data better from year to year. API visibility should be editable. That's really important. Status should be active. And then the rest at the bottom is pretty straightforward. There's nothing you should check here. It's using the default value from when you create a new object definition. So you would go here to create your new object, and then you will get automatically, we can do it actually, you would get automatically all these columns here. Yeah, so API visibility should be editable, effective dating should be basic, and then your code should be one block, and the rest is already pre-filled. I don't think there's anything you should change at the bottom. So for now, I'll just go back to the MDF that I've already configured, and so we'll should just look at the other fields that are really important. So once you have the first part of the MDF, the main settings here, then what's really important to pay attention to here at the field level is the external code, which is always by default when you click on create a new MDF, should be of data type user. That's mandatory. Then there should be a field in your MDF written exactly like this. The code should be template ID with a capital I. It's mandatory. If you put a capital D, it will fail. The publish to MDF will fail. And for this particular field, it should be of data type number, because that's the field that will receive the template ID when you make the publish, when you click on the publish action. It doesn't matter which database type of field it uses, nor the length, but these two here are the most important ones. And then all of your fields, like we mentioned earlier, they need to match the format of the fields on the worksheet. So here we're publishing a date from the worksheet, so we need to have a date in the MDF field. And then all these fields at the bottom are standard fields from the system. The system adds them automatically when you click on save for the first time for your MDF object. So you don't need you shouldn't remove them, but you don't need to if you don't see them when you click on create the new MDF, it's normal. They get added after the first save, and they're not being used as such in the integration between comp and MDF. So let's take a look now at this additional field that I used, which could be a good use case to build complicated calculations after a first publish back. So we have this field that I added, and it is populated through a business rule that I mapped it on my MDF. At the bottom here, it's called save rules, and I have a pretty standard business rule. It's a basic business rule when you create a new business rule, and basically all it says is, in any case, it's whenever there is a change on a record that's being published back, then you set the field that we were looking at to be equal to, and I entered a math expression. So I'm taking the field called money editable, and I'm multiplying it by the field called amount editable, and I'm dividing them by 2. And so having a business rule here enables you to do really complex calculations. The math expression, as we can see if I do make correction, the math expression is really powerful. You can build tons of conditions, including many, many fields. As long as the values are in already existing fields of the MDF, you can use them in calculations. You can also bring automatically, if you don't want to do any calculation, and if you just want to show on publish to MDF, if you want to show in additional fields some key information on the employee at the time of publish, you can also if you want to show, for example, the division, the department of the employee, you can go and instead of selecting math expression, you can use external code here. And external code will allow you to access job information of the employee on the effective date of publish. So you're publishing on October 28th. What is the department on October 28th? And you can simply select it here. The only thing is you would have to change the format, the type of field. I currently have this field as a decimal in my MDF design. You would have to switch it to string, which means text, if you want to bring some text in it. It would not work in this current setup. And that is done, if I leave here, that is done by clicking on Take Action and make correction, and then you can change the type of the data type of the field. So you would have to switch it to string, which means text, and then you would be able to pull all these information. So there's no limit to how many additional custom fields you can bring in here. You can really build something complex and move the complexity out of compensation and put it in the MDF, which is pretty amazing. Um, Maybe one last thing would be um, when you prepare the following cycle for the following year, all you have to do is really to copy the compensation template you already had and reference in the mapping the fields that were here from the previous cycle that you copied. So if this was called, instead of custom money editable, this was called custom payout 2021, well, it's already in here. So the following cycle, you just have to reference it in the new template and get it from here. So let's take a look now at the XML design. So I'm going to leave the full screen here and come here. So the XML design is pretty straightforward in the sense that it's um, very similar to what was already available for us to use, whether it is for publishing recurring information or non-recurring information, and now also comp information field. It's always located after comp budget override, after the comp budget override tag at the very bottom of each XML. Um, and the tag goes like this: comp MDF output component. Then the component type should always be custom MDF. And then the component code is the name, the code of your MDF object. So we saw earlier the very first field on top where I explained that it's better to not have any underscores in it. And then this effective date is available, but you can override it like we did by having an effective date that's specific to each user, which could come from a lookup table. And it's what I did here. So I added a column on my comp template called custom effective date MDF. It's an editable column on the worksheet like we saw, and it's populating the effective date of the MDF object here. And then it's a pretty straightforward mapping. You map the column ID of the composition worksheet to the field ID on the MDF, and then make sure to have the right tag at the end to close, and that's it. So maybe before concluding this video, let's take a look at how you can download the XML for your template. So it's done under Advanced Settings, Plan Setup. And if you wanted to configure it as a customer yourself, you actually could by downloading the XML from here, Download Form Template, editing the XML the way we explained in the previous parts of the video, and then reloading the XML from Actions for All Plans in Add New Compensation Plan. This is where you would upload the XML here into a new template. So the only drawback, and it's probably better to do it through SAP support or an implementation partner who can directly edit the existing template, because when you add a new template, you lose, if you use field-based permission, you will lose the field-based permission setup. You will have to do it again, and you are also going to lose all the permissions that may already be associated to your template in role-based permission, for example. It's better to work off the existing template that has been used for testing and have someone with provisioning access to make the change for you. I hope this video was helpful, and we are going to prepare a similar one for Comp Info Publish with a demo. Thank you.